Thank you all again for joining us for today's series, The Holocaust Through Interdisciplinary Tapestries. Thank you to our partners for this event, the Holocaust, Genocide, and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, the Generation of the Shoah, Liberation 75, the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center, as well as the Ghetto Fighters House. Throughout this entire series, we strive to address the issues of the Holocaust through lenses that are previously unexplored. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Ellen Resnick, and I'm the Educational Programs and Outreach Manager at Classrooms Without Borders. We do a compacted formal opening for each of these sessions as we want to provide enough time for our guests to be able to share their scholarly resource. Today's session focuses in on why should we care, the Holocaust and Public Humanities with Professor Björn Krondorfer. For those we are thankful for all your support over these 3 years, and most especially the past 3 years of navigating and expanding our presence for CWB. Over the past 3 years alone, we have offered 442 virtual programs with almost 75,000 participants, reaching almost 60 countries and most of the United States. Again, we apologize greatly for today's technical difficulties and starting 15 minutes late. I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, Tali Nates. Tali is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. She is a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust and genocide education, memory, reconciliation, and human rights. Born to a family of Holocaust survivors, her father and uncle were saved by Oskar Schindler. I will drop her more extensive bio into the chat in just a moment. Please send any questions you may have to me in the chat, and we will try our best to answer them all after Bjorn's presentation. I am now going to formally turn the program over to Tali to introduce today's scholar.
Thank you very much, Ellen. But more than anything, thank you, everyone, for your patience. What can we say? We are going to actually speak about it a little bit today, about the challenges. And one of the challenges is this digital platform. It's an opportunity, but it can be a challenge. And today, it is the later. But the series is a wonderful one so far. Started in February. We're covering such range of connections to the Holocaust, from psychiatry to law and now to education. And to do that, it is a pleasure to actually invite my friend, my colleague, a partner for many of the programs that we do, really a thinker, educator par excellence, Björn Krondorfer, to join us from Arizona and to speak to us about this very, very important topic and how it's connected to this tapestry of the Holocaust. Just very short introduction. I will post his full, very impressive biography in the chat. And please remember, comments, reflections, questions are all welcome. And after Björn will give some of his thoughts and share some of his thoughts with us, we will have a discussion and a conversations with you and with Björn. And I'm very happy that we are recording these sessions. So even though we have technical problems, you can watch it or re-watch it. And I welcome all those watching the Zoom with us now. So who is Björn Krondorfer? He is a Regents Professor and the Director of the Martin Springer Institute at Northern Arizona University. As endowed Professor of Religious Studies, he also teaches in the Department of Comparative Cultural Studies. And he received his PhD at Temple University, Philadelphia, and his field of expertise is religion, gender, and culture, and Holocaust and post-Holocaust and reconciliation studies. And you will see through his presentation today that he's making some of those connections with us. Björn, my friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tali. Thank you so much, Ellen and Esther and everyone else who make that series possible. And thank you for those who are listening on, no doubt, busy days on a weekday. And here we are. My time zone is still earlier in the morning, about shortly past 11. And for some of you, it's going toward the evening. What I would like to do today is to think about the Holocaust in the realm of public humanities. And by saying public humanities, I'm indicating that I'm thinking about Holocaust education within higher education, within colleges and universities. Although I think some of what I say might be applicable also to middle and high school students or teachings. I am speaking out of the American context. So for those of you who joined from other countries, I hope that some of the issues that I address today might be applicable, although in different ways, to your political, cultural, educational context. But keep in mind that we all speak out of a particular experience and particular environment, and that is my environment. To spare you thinking about where my accent is from, I will let you know. I was born in Germany 14 years after the Holocaust came to an end, to a non-Jewish German family. I came to the United States in 1983 for a one-year exchange program in academic study of religion, and I never left, and I'm here in the United States for the past 40 years. What I will do is, using a PowerPoint as a backdrop, you will encounter a few things that sound like truisms, things that seem particularly true and for no need of further explanation, especially if you have thought about Holocaust education in today's world. But I kind of want to go back a little and ask some larger questions rather than give you advice of how good Holocaust education should look like. Because I really think we need to, all of us need to think about where we are going in the near future with bringing the Holocaust to the attention of new generations. To me, someone born in the late 1950s, I'm so close, still so close to the events that I sometimes forget that the students I'm talking to, it's for them 80 years ago, 2-3 generations ago. If you're in the United States, it is 6,000 miles away. They don't understand geography. They don't even exactly know where Poland is, as one example. And I think, like, why should they care? Like, what is it that we bring to them that speaks to them, and that they should care about what happened a long time ago in a faraway place? And that is kind of the guiding thought that I have for us today. So if I'm switching to PowerPoint, hopefully that goes without any glitches. Can you all see the slide well? Okay.
It looks great.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me say just a few things about my context. I'm the director of the Martin Springer Institute. These are two last names, Doris Springer and Ralph Martin. They became a married couple. She survived the Holocaust in a town called Będzin in near Upper Silesia in Poland. And she became a resident of Flagstaff, where we are located with our university of 20,000 students. And they started an endowment to do some public educational programming year-round for students and the community alike. And you will see her right here embracing one of our students. We return to Będzin in a few moments, a little bit. We return to this picture in a little bit. These two photos just show you the kind of things we do. We have Holocaust survivors speaking and addressing a large crowd in our auditorium. This is a small intensive event where we brought Native American and other diverse American students to southern Israel to look there at the relations between Bedouin population and the Jewish Israeli population brought the whole group back to northern Arizona to do the same about the relationships between Native Americans and non-Native Americans in this country. Gives you a sense of the intensity of the programs we do, and we will use some of these examples today. Some of the public speaker events that we do, you can see that we have a dual mandate by just looking at the posters. One is to look at Holocaust legacy and history and memory, and the other is to look at spots in the world today where there is grave injustice or grave harm done to communities, and we mix them in our annual programming. Why should we care? Well, obviously we care because of the survivors of the Holocaust. This is Doris Martin, the founder of our institute, celebrating her 90th birthday here in Flagstaff. She passed away last summer. And as you all know, if you're in this field, the voices of those who experienced these troubled times between 1939 and 1945, most of them are no longer with us. But why do we care? Why do I care? Because they have cared for us to do this programming, and we are caring for them and now for their memories and legacies. I'm starting with a quote from a different context. The quote is, "The problem is not just that we do not know what the future has in store, but that we lack the concepts with which we experience it." This quote comes from Jonathan Lear out of a book that thinks about climate change and how to think about climate change today. But I think it also applies to our context, that it's hard for us to understand what is needed in the future to make Holocaust history, Holocaust legacy, Holocaust memory relevant to new generations. What are the paradigms we need to develop? I feel often we fall easily back to paradigms that were useful in the past, that were working in the past, but I do think to reach new generations, we need to move into uncharted territory, so to speak. And the quote that we may lack the concepts with which to experience the future very much applies to the core of the problem of which direction we need to take. And I want to explore this in a roundabout way with you. And I'm starting with this slide. This, for those who were in Auschwitz-Birkenau, will recognize it immediately. This is Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland, as I assume all of you know, the largest annihilation camp that Nazi Germany built. And we have the historic photograph of the selection, one of the few that we have. I don't want to explain too much. The hut back here is the reconstructed hut that we see here. This is the historical photograph. This is my earliest memory of that place when I took students, and Esther, this included your daughter at the time. We brought them back to Auschwitz-Birkenau into this then empty space, memorial space, and this accidental photo of this one person standing in the middle of the road, almost at the place where the Nazis selected people to their death or to forced labor. And the photo below here is yet another photo, and that is really today. I brought 20 Arizona teachers back to this place last summer in 2020, and you can see the tremendous changes that a place undergoes. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time about this for us to understand where the challenges are about today. What this group of dedicated teachers experienced is not what I experienced, and what I experienced is not what the place really was like. And how do we bridge these gaps in bringing to an understanding what the Holocaust meant and its implications to new generations? What I saw in the 1990s, this was an open, empty memorial space. You could walk into any barrack at the time you wanted to. You could explore it by yourself, no guides, no signs that prohibited you to go somewhere. The whole space was there for you to explore and feel and touch and relate. This is from 2022. Last year, what I saw, these barracks here are now beginning to be covered by these huge metal structures. They will remain there forever in order to renovate and preserve these structures. From a museum point of view, that makes perfect sense. From a point of view of how to experience a space, it is not the same. This is a curated space that looks more like a museum than a memorial space that connects to the atrocities that happened there. And honestly, I understand, of course, why this is being done. There are now 2 million visitors every year that goes to the memorial space of Auschwitz-Birkenau. In the 1990s, there were probably a few thousands every year, and something needs to be done, but it's no longer the same space. And even if we send students and teachers to that space to experience, they experience something very different than people in previous decades. What I experienced, 1989, first time I was there, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union and the opening of Poland. You walk through the part of Auschwitz-Birkenau, it's called Canada, the warehouses, and in the middle of the remains, all the barracks were burned down. You found these piles of remnants of the survivors. In this case, these were all the things collected from the arriving prisoners who were then killed in terms of their silverware. It was open, it was not protected, it was not marked, but it left an incredibly impact on the people who stumbled across these finds. 4 years later, in the early 1990s, the museum put up a little bit of a protection over these remnants so that people couldn't just take these things, which of course happened, as we know. People took some of these items and as for whatever reason. There was a little bit of protection a few years later. And today, none of that is there. Everything is cleared and cleaned. And now the objects are also cleared themselves and put on, not even on display, but you can find them on the websites of the Auschwitz Museum, Oswiecim Museum. And the big question is, this experience that I had and that people had for a few decades is no longer available. The physical sense of the atrocity that these places conveyed has now become a museum object that is just there for seeing, but not interacting. And here I bring in one colleague, Laura Marks, who talked about and thought about the difference between haptic visuality, seeing things haptically or optically. And I use these two photos to give you a sense of what it might mean. Haptic means you can be in close contact with the object that you're seeing. It is grounded, it's on the floor, it is available to touch. It is mimetic, meaning it relates directly to reality. An optical sense of the same objects is at a distance. It is figurative and not grounded, and it's mostly symbolic. So when our students see these objects on the right-hand side, obviously they relate to it completely differently than the immediacy that a pile of spoons would have had you been there in the 1980s and 1990s in the same space. Miles Lerman, the former national campaign chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., before it opened, he has the following quote from Laura Livett's publication, The Objects That Remain. He remembers, Miles Lerman remembers, and I'm reading it to you. I was asked to pose for a photograph with one of these items, a child's shoe. This is from Auschwitz-Birkenau. Let me tell you, when this little shoe was handed to me, I froze. When I held in my hands that shoe, the shoe of a little girl who could have been my own granddaughter, it just devastated me. And we feel the hand that you see with the child's shoes is not Miles Lerman's hand. It is a different hand, but I use that visual for you to see what it might mean to hold a shoe in your hand, a child's shoe in your hand. That very visceral experience that Miles Lerman had and to which he so movingly responded. He felt is important to replicate by building a museum. But in a museum structure, one of the things we know about museums is the least thing you're allowed to do is to touch anything. You're not allowed to touch, you're not allowed to physically relate to objects that are on display. So whatever Miles Lerman experienced, of course, is something that no one else was able to experience after as a museum visitor. And something gets lost in that translation of how we relate to objects, and by objects to the history and the immediacy of history, of traumatic histories, by putting up in museums. This is not a talk against museums. I'm just talking about the problematics of how we can bring to the attention of new generations why we should care. For Miles Lerman, it was very clear. We should care because it has this immediate impact on you. If you have been there, this is a different way of representing the shoes behind glass. This is in Oswiecim, the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, and has been there for decades now. It is the room that you walk in and everyone gets immediately quiet. It's almost like a sacred space. If you have an opportunity to go there, it has an immediate impact on the visitor. This is the Holocaust Memorial Museum displaying the shoes in a different way. But of course, what Miles Lerman experienced is not what we can experience today, and my students wouldn't experience. And I want us to think about what these shoes represent. First, when you talk to people who walk through the museum in Washington, D.C., they often refer to this particular moment in the museum as something that touches them more than anything else that they read or saw. And part of it is they describe the smell of those shoes as they walk through this floor, meaning they have a haptic, visual, a sensual experience with history that they don't get from just looking at things. And I want to use a term here for you to think about, precarium. It means two things. Precarium could either refer to, as a legal term, to an item that needs to be returned to owners upon the change of a situation, or the status of precariousness, something that is unstable on shaky grounds. And I will say that those shoes are a precarium, something that is a legal entity and something that is precarious and needs to be preserved carefully. And we see this here in this particular case. Why is it precarium in a legal sense? A few years ago, I forget exactly when it was, those shoes became the property of the Polish nation. It became property, a national property from Poland. And that meant that the shoes we now see in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. are legally the property of Poland, and they are given as a loan to the Holocaust Museum. Every 5 years, these shoes need to be returned to Poland, carefully packed, preserved. That's the preservation part. The precariousness is that they can fall apart. Carefully packed, preserved, sent back in crates to Poland, upon which a new crate of shoes will be sent back to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. to be unpacked and carefully displayed again. And every 5 years now we have this exchange because these shoes have become legally a legal entity, the property of someone that needs to be exchanged and carefully preserved. So the issue of precarium is both there, something that most visitors and people who think about the Holocaust are unaware of. Those who know George Kwiatkowski, a Polish musician, a Polish artist, and also someone who is deeply invested in unearthing Holocaust history in Poland today. While he was exploring the surroundings of the Stutthof concentration camp in Poland, he came across in an overgrown part of the forest, outside of the camp perimeters, a pile of shoes, of which he then eventually made the museum aware of, and then they went in and tried to preserve. But the photos that you see here, the immediacy of the photo that he took when he uncovered, and he writes movingly about it, when he found and uncovered these shoes outside from victims, that is the kind of haptic visuality that speaks to you differently, I would argue, than the shoes displayed as legal entities carefully preserved in a museum space. These encounters cannot be mirrored or replicated with students, but I want us to become aware of what we are losing as we move into new technologies, into new ways of turning everything into a museum object, assuming that the museum space is a space where we can convey the gravity of the Holocaust without further questioning it. One more detour. 1989, my first encounter with Auschwitz-Birkenau. The photo up there is inside the camp of Birkenau. There are these pools that were used for water at the time. The Nazis built them in case there's a fire to douse the flames of the wooden barracks. These pools in 1989 were used by the local youth as swimming pools inside the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. And also on the right-hand side, the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp was completely open. You could walk in and out anytime, and also drive through it to get to your fields if you were a peasant at the time. And so this street today would be completely closed off. You can't do this anymore. Obviously, you wouldn't see this anymore either. Of course, it led to lots of discussions with the students I took there about the appropriateness of what to do with a space 50 years later, and by now 80 years later. But here's the challenge. I'm juxtaposing these two images. The Polish peasant driving his cart through with a horse through the Birkenau place in 1989. Today, the fully explored and furnished, whatever the good term would be, the way how we now move 2 million people to and from different places in around Oswiecim, from the Stammlager to the camp, and then the Auschwitz-Birkenau Auschwitz buses that run on a regular basis. Or the local students here, and then the international young people here, local young people here in 89, international young people in today's world. We have exchanged, so to speak, the population from a regional population to a global population. But we have also invited new issues and new problems. She stands, it's a random photo, but she kind of stands for the people I'm addressing when I ask, like, why should we care? Why would she care? And what is being lost by having moved memorial spaces into spaces that become protected and become more into open air museums rather than memorial sites that can be explored individually? What are the paradigms we need to develop? I will not answer this question full, but I want us to think about it. How do new technologies help or hinder us? That is an area that I'm least competent to answer, except to say that I'm skeptical about assuming that technology will solve our problems. I'm also skeptical about the fetishizing of new technology, assuming that technology will answer the question of why should we care. I actually don't think they do. They can only help us or sometimes hinder us to answer the question. Very importantly, I'm arguing that we need to localize and regionalize our approaches to Holocaust education while keeping a globalized perspective in mind. That speaks against universalizing Holocaust, the goals of Holocaust education. Very briefly, an audience in the Bronx in New York that has a majority or large group of Muslim students in their classes, they cannot be approached with Holocaust education the same way that we would approach a rural student population in Kansas, or the population on the southern part of Arizona, which has a large Hispanic population of refugee and immigrant population. We can't just assume that we can teach the Holocaust in the same way, which makes me a little bit of skeptical that we teach to our teachers the same kind of programs that come out of very professionalized and smart people like the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., but they don't necessarily know the local, regional aspects of where we teach. And I think we really need to pay attention to this. If we ask, why should we care? We need to ask, why should we care in what situation? I do feel it needs hands-on experiences, the kind of touch that we lose, and teaching some pre-professional skills. I do think we need to be open to opportunities and connectivity, and also keep ethical deliberations in mind about what it is that we are doing. And now I give you, in the times that remain, a few examples of the work we do at our institute as examples to see what opportunities there might be if we are open to these kind of guidelines, use of technologies, what are the paradigms, localize, hands-on experience, and be open to opportunities. I'm starting with the Beijing project that Tali Nates knows very well, since we brought it to South Africa at some point. It started like this. A group of students working with us on simply locating the town of Beijing on a map. For American students, that is always a challenge. Why Beijing? Because that is the town and ghetto where our founder, Doris Martin, survived. So we used that as our entry point into the exploration of one particular ghetto in Poland to exemplify how young people understood, lived through, or in some cases did not live through, the years of 1939 to 1944. What started like this explorative version with no idea that where it would take us, we ended up with a traveling exhibit that you see here, and the poster tells you the title of it, Through the Eyes of Youth, Life and Death in the Beijing Ghetto. Why do I start with this? Because this is engaging young people in the actual research with an open-ended project. We had no idea where it will take us. We had no idea what we'd find. We had no idea there would be photos or memoirs or diaries of young people between 1939 and 1945. It was an open-ended project, hands-on, and eventually moving to a pre-professional project where we created this traveling exhibit. It opened in Northern Arizona University. You see Doris, still alive then, embracing the students who help us work with it. You see a Jewish day school in New York looking at the exhibit. It was against all of our expectations, translated into Polish and shown in Sosnowiec. Those who know the region, Sosnowiec is right next to Beijing. They're almost like one city by now. Back then, separated by a 15-minute ride. And you see the Polish translation and the Polish audience today looking at their own histories of their neighborhood. It went to Johannesburg and Cape Town, different audiences. We got questions about how that might relate to apartheid. And it's wonderful to engage these kind of explorations. Again, when I say we need to regionalize and localize, Beijing is Beijing. It's 1940s in Poland, but the issues that come up need to be retranslated and brought into conversation in the places where you show these things or where you train docents, like in the picture below, how to approach something that for students in South Africa would be, again, even further away. And again, the question is, why should they care? They have a lot of issues at home. Another way is to take people back to Beijing, which we did last summer with 20 Arizona teachers from middle and high schools. We wanted them to experience part of where the Holocaust happened so that they can bring their own memories and experiences back into the classrooms in Arizona. With the idea that if a teacher had this sense of feeling of space, the dimension of space, of distances, of how it looks like, of what is lost, that they can bring some of their own felt experience back into the classroom and make it more real to the students. These photos show you the synagogue, this wonderful big synagogue in the middle of town of Beijing. 50% in this town are Jewish, 50% of the population is Catholic Polish. Then soon after the Nazis occupied this town, the space where the synagogue once stood is now an empty space. The empty space right here in this photo. As one German memory activist said in the 1990s, beware of green spaces in towns, because sometimes green spaces means this is where there were structures or cemeteries related to the culture that was eradicated in Germany. So true for Benjin too, beware of green spaces. It's a wonderful green space, but what is lost is that magnificent synagogue that was destroyed. You see a picture here a day after it was burned down. And a sketch of a young woman who survived Benjin, who sketches her experiences in these drawings, right starting after 1945. And interestingly, she writes in German. For many Jews in Benjin, German was the language of their choice. And she writes even after 1945, she gives titles of her sketches, memory sketches in German. Tempelvernichtung, the destruction of the temple, which is this temple here. Sosnowiec ghetto is right here. Benjin ghetto is right here. By Sosnowiec, this is where Art Spiegelman comes from, for those who know Maus. These two places are very much related in distance, as you can see it. We come back to this in a moment. Getting in touch with history. Now, we can't bring every student there, but we can bring teachers there. We are standing with a teacher group from Arizona in front of the house of Doris Martin, our survivor founder. She mentioned she wrote a memoir with her husband. It's called Kiss Every Step. Seems fairly abstract for Holocaust memoir, but the steps she's referring to are the steps that you see in this photo. These were the steps up to their apartment in Benjin when her whole family survived a selection by the Nazis. Doris' father at the time said, when they all came back and were relieved that they weren't deported, the father said to the whole family member that everyone needs to kiss every step of these stairs because they survived. These are the stairs. Underneath the refurnished part are the old stairs that Doris once walked up, that she references in the title of her memoir. And all these teachers went up these stairs. And again, the sense of haptic, it's not just a visual experience, but a physical experience that brings to you the immediacy, a sensory kind of learning that can never be taught through book learning or historical lessons by themselves. This is the Jewish couple, this is the Polish couple that lives there now. They invited us to join. They opened their home. They treated us extremely well with water in a hot summer day and allowed all of us to explore their apartment they are now inhabiting for the last 16 years. They know about Doris. They knew where her hiding place was. We presented them this book, the Polish translation of Doris Martin's English version. And this woman, our host, immediately started crying when she received the book because she said, I can finally read her story, which I couldn't because she doesn't speak English. It also defies some of the stereotypes you may or may not have about Polish people closing their houses to everyone outside. Not in this case. As you can see, we were all there. Another spin-off, we looked at the women of the Benjin survivors that we covered. Later on, we realized how many of them were in the resistance. And this could be a whole separate talk now, but young women's resistance Benjin was extraordinary. They had close contact with Warsaw. So once you're open to opportunities, one thing can lead to the next that brings back the relevance to particular audiences at particular times. Jane Lipsky that you see here, she's from Tucson, Arizona. Doris Martin from Flagstaff, Arizona. Just accidentally, these two women became Arizona residents who survived the Benjin ghetto. They did not know of each other and they never met in person, but we connected them indirectly, so to speak. Jane Lipsky, I'm spending a minute on her from Tucson. Our students visiting her. As you know, this cannot happen much anymore. At the time, it was possible. Jane died in 2020. Her story is remembered in this book, Stolen Youth. She's here with our students. Whatever these students experience can no longer be replicated. Again, an appeal that we need to look at new paradigms of how we want to bring these kind of experiences back to new generations. Her particular story is complicated. She ended up in the resistance, fled the ghetto, went to Slovakia, was caught by the Soviets, who were supposed to help her. Instead, they incarcerated her, suspected her as a German spy because she was speaking German. She ends up in the Gulag system and is not relieved from the Gulag system until 1947, 2 years after the end of the Holocaust. Stories that can spin into different directions, bring in more world history events between two totalitarian systems, if that is the route you want to take. We later discovered that Jane Lipsky, who was born Jadzia Spiegelman, is a relative of the famous author of Maus, Art Spiegelman. Her father and his father are cousins. They're related. We did not know this when we interviewed her. We found it out later. Again, be open to new connections that you can bring students into these conversations or your community. These are 2 pages from the Maus book. Those who know it, has become a controversial book in educational circles in Tennessee when the school board banned the book from the school library. Here, this is Jewish people in the version of art. He's translating his father's memory into these cartoon figures. So that's a story of his father telling them meeting at the stadium in Sosnovich, the large deportation place to Auschwitz. This is the same place. The people who walk there in Art Spiegelman's version is that place, is that fence. And as you can see, our Benzin exhibit was put up on display on the soccer stadium fence. It's now a soccer stadium again. It was there for 4 months, never vandalized in any shape or form. Only the rain eventually destroyed it, but none of the people in the neighborhood touched this. As the opposite, they stopped and read what was put up there. A way to reach out from a local initiative in Flagstaff, Arizona, suddenly finding a whole new audience in Poland that we didn't expect it when we started. Another part, just for you to think about connectivity, there's one panel in Art Spiegelman's work that is a great educational tool if we use it right, that simply has this only panel here about 4 women being hanged in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he doesn't say more about it. And you think like, okay, it's just a story that his father tells him. They're driving to New England in the car, but this is how the son tries to imagine what his father experienced, that story that he's telling him. A reader who's not familiar with the Holocaust will flip through this image because there's no other return to this image in the graphic novel. But these are the 4 women historically who are depicted here, including Regina and Rosa and Ala and Esther. 2 of them are from Benzin. A casual reader, a student in middle school or high school who use the book will not think about this at all unless you bring in something else, namely the actual people who are not further explored in Art Spiegelman's memory. This is a photo taken from the museum in Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland. This is one of the people we cover in our exhibit, Rose Recknick, 1931. Why do we show this picture? Why do we show it right now? Generally, we show the picture because this is the woman whose story we can tell. We cannot tell any other story of this large family photo that was taken in 1931 before the Nazi occupation. All the stories of the people we see here are lost. But what we later learned is that this lady here, who is the aunt of the person we cover, is one of the women who are hanged in Auschwitz-Birkenau as part of the resistance. That goes back to these 4 women here. drawn in memory from this artist that we mentioned and seen before. She drew the synagogue burned. She also draws this image because she was also a prisoner in Birkenau and survives. And as we then later show that, yes, we have her story, and this photo of the 4 women who were in the resistance was actually cropped out of the photo that we used and shown in Auschwitz-Birkenau as one of the 4 women who were in the resistance. So suddenly local, global history presence come together in unexpected ways. And I can tell you, when we tell the stories to student classes or to teachers, they get the sense that I feel we have been losing in bringing closer to home the reasons why people need to care, because this could be your family. This is closer to home than you think. There are these accidental relationships that need to be explored and make relevant to people. I'm coming quickly to a close. A few other things to think about. Our most recent exhibit, Gina Perrine and the Holocaust, titled A Complicated Life in Complicated Times. This is the opening of the exhibit on our campus. You can see these are his paintings. You think like, well, this is a Christian painting, and that's a portrait in the style of the late 1800s, early 1900s, and all of that is true, except Gino Perrine was born Jewish, changed his name from Yehuda Pollock to Gino Perrine, changed his religion to Catholicism later in his life, thinks he's absolutely safe in Trieste, Italy, where he is a painter under Mussolini's Italy. He seems to have flirtatious relations with Mussolini's fascism for a moment. He wins the Mussolini Prize for his artwork. And then finally, unexpected to him in 1943, the Gestapo knocks on his door in Trieste. He'd never tried to hide, arrests him, sends him to Bergen-Belsen, and he dies as a Jewish person in Bergen-Belsen that same that same year. So we're telling a story to a new audience that identifies both with Catholicism or with Judaism or with European history, and bring it back to a new audience. Why here? Because these paintings are in the possession of an Arizona resident near Flagstaff. That is the local connection to global issues. And we're trying to connect the local people in the exploration of history. The people who still have these paintings in their possession, they had no idea what we would discover. They just brought them to our attention, told us about Gino and that he died in Bergen-Belsen. That's as much as they knew. And then we explored in full a very complicated story of one man at the margins of the Holocaust. We do local research, again, not universalized, but localized, regionalized. Resilience of women in flags of past and present included Jewish women, a survivor and a non-survivor, included women from minority groups, Hispanic groups, Chinese women who were expelled eventually from Flagstaff in the 1890s, LGBTQ women, Native American women, different women who left an impact on the city, but who are usually ignored, but including women who are Jewish identified or survivors. The same with Flags of Jewish Lives. This is a booklet we published, again, bringing the Holocaust back to what did people know in our small town in Arizona? Back then, 25,000 people, now 70,000 people. What did they know? How did they respond? Did they or did they not respond? We do regional work with student groups, working with other faculty members, bringing to the border to Mexico. We are inside Mexico here with a student group, and in the desert, doing both practical work by depositing water in the desert, but also learning about migration and refugee issues. We went back to Maus with new technology, Zoom technology, to have a teach-in on why Maus was banned. Thematic issues that are global, to second-generation artists, children of survivors who approached the Holocaust through their memories, through their parents' story, or enlarging again to trauma responses by different artists that included Jewish artists, but also went beyond Jewish artists to include Mexican artists, Iranian artists, and different artists struggling, Israeli artists struggling with their own histories that were problematic or painful or traumatic. And last but not least, how do we even get started? Sometimes just a call for papers. We're looking for students to work with us. On the right-hand side, this was based on this box of photographs. We got 300 photographs in this kind of shape and order. This unorder just thrown together from a family who wanted to throw away these photographs. Someone had the good sense to not throw them away, but donate them to us. These are 300 photographs of an American GI in 44, 45, as he travels through Germany and Austria and comes across also Soviet prisoner camps where Soviet soldiers survived or didn't survive. And you see them here now working on putting an order to these photos, preserving them, learning preserving techniques, finding out where they were taken using new technologies, or news project stories from the Spanish Civil War, again, responding to community interest. This fan was given to a German person who lives now in Phoenix, Arizona, nearby. He never looked at the backside. He suddenly realized on the backside of this fan, there were 31 signatures of volunteer fighters from America against Franco's regime in the 1938, signed by their name. And we ventured to discover all of these and identify all of these men and find out of who they were and what stories we can tell about them. So connectivity, localize, bring people in who approach you and work with them and then with students to make people care what I often think are their neighbors. I'm finishing. What do we need? New paradigms, critical employment of new technologies. I'm hearing a strange echo. Do you hear that too?
I do not.
Okay, then I keep talking. Localize and regionalize our approaches to the Holocaust. Keep the global perspective in mind, but not universalize the lessons. Try to bring hands-on experience back to students. The touch, the haptic visuals, the pre-professional skills, that is what interests them, that's what excites them, that is when they fully understand what the Holocaust is about. Yourself as a teacher, educator, community organizers, be open to opportunities and connections that you can make. Don't close down doors. And I always think like we always need to be very deliberate about the ethical components or the ethical dimension that we bring to each project and that we want to convey to our audience. There has to be an additional message than simply historical facts and historical narratives. It needs to be open up to something that people can connect to today. For us, social justice is important, but that's just us. Other people may find other things important, given your own context in your own country or region that you live in. And here I stop.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Björn. Fantastic presentation, certainly thought-provoking, and we have dozens and dozens of comments and questions. And in the few minutes that we have left, you know, I was thrown back when you started with the discussion about Auschwitz then and now, the haptic and, you know, all those memories, and then what now and what is coming to our students. Of course, I was thinking about Majdanek, the smell of the shoes, the changes there, the difference between a visit in Majdanek and the smell of the shoes and visit in Auschwitz and no smell of shoes. You know, so in one context, you can have all those things that you spoke about. And maybe finally, before I'm going into the first of the questions or comments, thinking about our friend Michael Berenbaum, that is always speaking about the end of an era of the survivors. In the next years, we will not have survivors with us. And he's saying to us and warning us that we are in a period where living memory is becoming historical memory. And then how do you do that? How do you deal with that when you speak to your students that will not meet a survivor, will not see a shoe, will not have the smell, will not have the experience? So lots of questions, and maybe I'll start with the first one, how do we balance the need for preservation of objects and future generations can see them, can learn about them, versus the desire for the haptic experience? And I think that is a very key question, not only for museums, but also for education.
It is a key question, and it sometimes keeps me up at night because I don't have a good answer, only to say there is an issue that we haven't fully addressed. And hence my plea that we need to come together and think about different ways to move forward to a future we have a hard time imagining right now. I do know when I came back from Auschwitz-Birkenau last summer, when I was there in June 2022, and you saw the pictures that I took, I felt like at some point preservation is undoing what it wants to preserve, or is undoing what it wants to convey. And I almost told myself I never want to go back again. It doesn't help me to understand anything. But of course, I know I have a privileged position because I've been there before and I know what it could do, and I now know what it no longer does. And it might be different for new student generations to walk the path, but it's a prescribed path now. Everything is prescribed. Nothing is spontaneous. You can't go where you want to. If you have a small group, you have to have a guide. Everything is regulated. And I understand all the reasons, because people are thoughtless and they destroy things either because they want to or because inadvertently. How to go about it? I don't know. The idea of haptic visuality is the one thing I feel is where we can do better, that we get not just a optical representation of something, but find a way to display items in such a way that you feel like you can connect them to them in a different way. And probably that's the best we can do right now. We can't have every student touch a shoe because, as I said, they are legal entities. They need to be preserved. Again, preserved for seeing, not for touching. I think my main argument is we're losing touch with history, and I mean it in an almost literal sense. And what are our ways to bring touch back? And some of the projects I showed at the end is trying to say, like, okay, we can find ways for students, and I work with university students, but there may be different ways for middle and high school students to actually bring back touch by something where an object is not a precarium, not a legal entity, not something that we're afraid will get destroyed by it being touched, and then working with that immediacy. I think this is my plea basically at this point for each of us to think about what can we bring that brings back this feeling of I am closer with one aspect of that history that is so large and immense it becomes eventually meaningless unless we translate this into something that makes sense on a local or regional level. That's ultimately my plea.
So there is a follow-up question, and maybe it's something for us all to think about. What about replicas? What about recreation? Knowing that it is a recreation, but something that you can touch. And one of our listeners is engaging not only with the shoes, but also, enabling going into, a barrack or going in, and in Auschwitz, in Birkenau, actually, it is a recreated wooden barrack and, putting together certain elements. But what do you think about that to bring us closer to the touching of the objects?
I mean, people in museums today try to do this by recreating objects and then basically meant for children, younger children, that they can touch because they still know that children learn through touch. And then at some point we assume like adults don't need this anymore. And I don't think that is true. We do. But, I live in the Southwest in the United States. We have lots of Native American small local museum spaces. And we know that, there are shards everywhere around that region. And then museums, they recreate a little bit of pottery, new pottery, and then you're allowed to touch it and think like, what does it feel? And of course, no adult will ever do this. But if I take some of my visitors from Europe or other places to the actual sites and where we walk around and you see suddenly a pottery shard from the 12th century in the middle of a forest, that is, again, that immediacy that can never be replicated in a museum space. I don't have a good answer for this. I understand the importance of museums, and Tali, you know it, you're having a museum. But it's like two different experiences. And then, of course, then people can behave inappropriately or appropriately if they discover these things in nature or somewhere, because you're not supposed to take them with you, because then you destroy, and it's cultural theft. You can't control this, obviously, and the same is true for Auschwitz-Birkenau. People did take these spoons that I showed you. I don't know why, but they did, and so you had to do something. It's inevitable, but I think we need to find ways to bring a sense of either haptic visuality or touch differently back to people if we want the new generation to actually care and not just learn it as an historical event.
So you didn't want to go much into the digital sphere, but there are 2 or 3 questions about what do you think about, let's say, virtual reality. You go into Majdanek. I know that Stephen Smith was busy with some of those, 360, you see where you are and so on. Looks very real. You can go with the survivor, let's say Pinchas Guter, see where he was, what did he experience. So someone is asking about virtual reality. Someone else is saying, what do we do with social media? Can we learn about the Holocaust from, social media as young people? So maybe engage a little bit now with that.
Yeah, I do it quickly. I need to preface it. I'm a technology skeptic. I don't easily embrace new technology. Partially because that's not where my strength is, and partially because I worry that by using technology, we forget what the content is about. So we see with these 3D animations, we have a local survivor, Oscar Noble, who also has been put into this format, and you can ask him endless questions, and for most questions, you get an answer in his voice, because the computer, as you know, the computer technology is such that they can understand what you're asking and then go back to a certain segment of his narrative and he can respond. My big question is, have we truly asked the question why we are doing this? That's question number 1. Why are we doing this? Same question I have about putting these huge structures around the barracks in Auschwitz-Birkenau. What exactly are we afraid of? That these barracks might decay over time? Is that the worst thing for us to imagine? I mean, is it okay if evil places eventually fall apart over time? It's a question worth pondering. We don't ponder it anymore. And the same with survivors. Is it okay to have them on video or just read their works? And if you want to engage with real people, engage with the 2nd generation, the 3rd generation, or people who have similar experiences, not the same, but experiences similar to what they may have gone through, to bring them in as speakers. And the last big question is, once we have this technology, we can create all kinds of alternative universes where truth and lies are indistinguishable. And that is true for social media and learning about the Holocaust, because how do students who don't know much about it distinguish between what is a truthful statement, the statement you want to listen to, and something that is just made up and possibly a hateful statement? As Holocaust educators, most people, I assume, here on our participate today, we would know perhaps the difference, but the people who we want to care, they don't know the difference. We need to get them to use these technologies in ways that technologies themselves don't do it. We can create 3D animation with anything we want to, ultimately.
Yeah, and that's the pitfalls, of that, and very scary thought that you can create, places that actually do not exist and stories that are fake. And we know it from literature. We all remember Fragments, the book describing survivors testimony that never existed. So certainly quite a scary thought. There are lovely, lovely comments and questions that we don't have much time to reflect on. Erica shared one of the participants' grandfather's family in Belgium in the 1920s, and a photograph, beautiful photograph that I'll share with you, Björn, later. And Erica, if you don't mind to share with Björn maybe who shared that, I'm sure that there will be great interest, because Björn's university is, as you saw, adding all the time stories. There's also a website. We had a survivor from Belgium that we managed to add his story to Björn's project. So it's growing. It's still growing, and a wonderful project. So that, and maybe just as a last question before I read a beautiful comment about your talk, wonderful talk, is do you know of organizations or groups that can help enhance this localized issue of Holocaust education? Because this is a great idea. And Ellen and Erica, does CWB do things like that? Can other organizations help with localized story? How do you start? And Björn, you started because your founder was from Belgium, but how do you start? Where is the starting point is the question.
So one of the most exciting things among a younger generation of people who want to explore and make it real are people who are called or call themselves memory activists, which is a wonderful term, because it's both people who have historical interest, but not just for the sake of history, but because they want to bring into conversation what they find about a particular space or place or narrative, put it into conversation of where they are at the time with issues that concern them today. Much of the memorial in the former Soviet Union that is now under attack by Putin, this organization tries to recover the Gulag history, long suppressed Gulag history. They started as memory activists, and memory activism means it's not just armchair historical educational concepts, but going out in the field, working with people, interviewing people, and then putting that into a conversation in different media, what they do. And they know it could be sometimes, well, in the case of Gulag, it's dangerous work, but in every place it's slightly dangerous work, because sometimes the local authorities don't like to see what you do. You could do this at the border with Mexico or in Arizona. You probably can find ways to do this in Johannesburg at certain spaces. But again, I can't speak about ideas, but I think each locality probably has an opportunity to think about what is an issue here and who are the people that we can connect to. Maybe I'm just making things up. If you come from a rural community, maybe you want to connect to a rural community in Eastern Europe at the time rather than the Warsaw Ghetto, because that is how you can connect to the stories that are being told, and they make sense to you differently than if you are an urban population.
No, these are fantastic ideas, and I think that coming from a museum or a center that calls itself a center of memory activism, I truly agree with you that it is to look at also your local connections and Holocaust local connections, but sometimes beyond. And maybe just final thought with the digging in Warsaw around Mila Street and others, the artifacts that are coming out are hopefully giving new opportunities to engage with artifacts. Also, the same was the case in Sobibor with the archaeological findings there. So maybe, just maybe, we are 80 years later, are actually discovering new fields of discoveries through archaeology and museums that are doing such archaeology, new museums developing, in this case in Poland. But it connects very nicely to a comment that says, really thank you, about this fantastic, excellent talk. And let me just read to you as we closing. This is a truly excellent talk, refreshing to have these important questions asked in a way which one can only call intellectual, and that's properly probing and demanding. And also the new terminology that you gave us, Björn, which we all appreciate and can certainly use in our teaching, in our thoughts, in our engagement with this topic. So I will send you the full beautiful comment and the many, many other questions and the photograph from Björn as well. But before I hand over to Ellen, just to say,
oh no, we lost
And just
Tali.
at this moment, she's freezing.
That couldn't have happened at a better time. Tali, unfortunately, it appears that your internet is lagging a little bit behind. I want to formally thank Tali and Björn for today's session. It really was incredibly enlightening. Just as Tali mentioned, we've had so many fantastic
imagine
moments
Ellen
coming through.
next to you.
You're back.
Sorry,
You were frozen.
Did I freeze? If you did not hear anything, I just said thank you very much, Björn, for an excellent, excellent presentation.
I must have read your mind because that is exactly what I was saying. Thank you again for this fantastic presentation. Again, as Tali mentioned, so many outstanding comments. I want to thank both of you as well as Esther and all of the participants for being incredibly patient and giving us such grace and understanding with our technological difficulties. We will do our best to investigate exactly what happened and assure that this doesn't happen for the rest of the series. As you know, however, those of you that are here, the link does remain the same, so the same Zoom link will work for all of the future events in this series. And again, for those of you that are here, this is probably not the right audience, but we do record all of our sessions. So if you do miss a session or you came in late to this session because of those technological difficulties, that recording will be sent out to everyone in an evaluation and recording email, which you'll get in a couple days. Again,
Ellen, can I do a shout out?
Yes.
Can I do a shout out both for Tali Nate's museum, memorial activism space that I visited, and it's beautiful, but also to you, Ellen, and Classrooms Without Borders. I feel like what I was arguing for is education that is aware of borders, but ultimately wants to transcend those borders and be aware of them. So glad you're doing this work.
Thank you. What a beautiful sentiment. I just dropped the membership link into the chat. All of the recordings are now curated on our new website. So all you have to do is simply fill out that membership form. And within 48 hours, you will get a link and a password, and then you can access all of those past recordings. We hope that you'll join us next week. The date for that event, just for clarification, is May 18th at 2 p.m. The title of that session is entitled Holocaust Cinema, How a Film Unfinished Questions Archival Footage, featuring Annette Insdorf. Again, stay safe, stay healthy. We hope that we'll see you all again soon. And thank you all for being here and for being so patient with us. Thank you, Tali, and thank you, Björn. Bye, everyone.